Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington at a pivotal moment in the Republican presidential primary. There are contests in 4 states and the District of Columbia this weekend, and this Tuesday will be the single biggest night of the primary with a whopping 865 Republican delegates at stake from coast to coast on Super Tuesday. It could very well be the last chance for Nikki Haley and Trump skeptics in her party to make their voices heard. Amid that urgency, I sat down with Haley on this set earlier today in an exclusive interview for Sunday's Meet the Press. Here's some of what she told me. Do you think Donald Trump would follow the Constitution if he were elected to a second term?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you always want to think someone will, but I don't know. You know, when you go in and you talk about revenge, when you go and you talk about, you know, vindication, when you go and you talk about what does that mean? Like, I don't know what that means. And only he can answer for that. What I can answer for is I don't think there should ever be a president that's above the law. I don't think that there should ever be a president that has total immunity to do whatever they want to do. I think that we need to have someone that our kids can look up to, that they can be proud of. And I think we need to have a country of law and order, a country of freedom, and a country that goes back to respecting the value of a taxpayer dollar. And we don't have any of that right now.
Folks, that's a pretty significant statement from someone who served in Donald Trump's cabinet and a grave warning about a second Trump term. Haley's comments about potential lawlessness in a second Trump administration comes on a day where the future of the multiple criminal trials facing the former president is playing out in courtrooms in both Florida and Georgia. The former president is looking to derail or delay the trials into his conduct. Mr. Trump appeared in a Florida courtroom earlier today as his lawyers tried to push his classified documents trial until after the November election. And in Georgia, a judge heard final arguments amid a push from the former president and his co-defendants to have Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis disqualified from that election interference case. Of course, we were just carrying all of that. This all comes as the Supreme Court has agreed to hear Mr. Trump's presidential immunity defense in a move that's guaranteed to push the special counsel's January 6th case closer to Election Day. That's if the Supreme Court allows the case to proceed. With the Republican frontrunner in a protracted state of legal limbo, his rival Nikki Haley is hoping voters get some clarity. Here's what she told me when I caught up with her on the campaign trail last night in Northern Virginia.
I think all of the cases should be dealt with before November. We need to know what's going to happen before the presidency happens, because after that, should he become president, I don't think any of it's going to get heard. I don't think that a president should be immune from anything. I think that the president has to live under laws, too. And he's asking for things that no other president's ever asked for. So I hope the Supreme Court rules quickly, and I hope they make their decision. But I think that they do have to give an answer on this.
When you say you hope the Supreme Court rules quickly, do you mean that you would like to see this case go to trial before Election Day, if Trump is the nominee, so that voters know the outcome of this case?
I think voters are going to want to know what they're walking into. And if they're walking into a president who's still going to have to be in court, or if they're walking into a presidency where he can get rid of a court case, voters are going to want to know that.
We've got a big team to start us off. NBC's Ali Vitale is following Nikki Haley right here in Washington, D.C. NBC's Ken Dilanian is in Florida, where Donald Trump appeared in court today. NBC's Marissa Parra is in Georgia with the latest in the Fani Willis disqualification hearing. And NBC's Garrett Haake is with me on set. He, of course, has been following the Trump campaign. Ali, I have to start with you. I want to get your reaction to what we heard from Nikki Haley, those stunning comments. She says she's not sure if Trump would follow the Constitution in a second term. She also said she would like all of his court cases to be dealt with before Election Day. What do you make of it?
Kristen, 2 really stunning comments, and kudos to you for making that news in these interviews with Nikki Haley that you did, because she is pretty hard to pin down, especially when it comes to matters of Donald Trump. I do think that she has, of course, shown more of a willingness to go after her only rival at this point in the race, but I also think that she still has a lot of areas that are sort of no-go zones when you ask her questions around the former president. The fact that she would say, and really that anyone would be able to say, that the likely nominee of their party may or may not respect the Constitution is, as you said, absolutely stunning. And it really does tee up Nikki Haley for the quandary of what does she do if she drops out of this race, and does she find a way to endorse her former boss, or are all of these criticisms more than that? Are they more than just words? Are they actual red flags that she is willing to continue to challenge her party with? Because it is really, truly shocking to hear that someone who could be next in line for the presidency might not respect the Constitution. That's the first thing that I thought about. The second, though, when she says that she wants all of these court cases to be dealt with and adjudicated before Election Day, same. And I think I meet voters all the time who feel the exact same way, because they want to be able to make that kind of a decision. And never before have they been faced with the fact that the person that they could vote for, one of a few people that they have the option of, could be not just facing criminal prosecution, but convicted of those crimes. It really is, I know we use this word all the time, unprecedented, but it really makes and forces politicians to make statements that I don't think any of us thought we would be covering in presidential politics.
Yeah, I think you're right, Allie, and it certainly does lay out the stakes. And I do press her on whether she is able to get to an endorsement or if that's off the table.
Yeah.
We'll tease ahead to that for Sunday. Allie, very quickly, we have about 30 seconds. We're here in D.C., where Haley, of course, spoke to supporters. Is this a place where she thinks she might have a shot at pulling off a win?
Absolutely raucous room, I have to tell you, when Nikki Haley was speaking at one of the sole polling places the Republican voters were at today in Washington, D.C. for this voting day that's coming up. I got to say, though, if you're Nikki Haley and you don't know any state that you can win, is it better to be in the Republican primary and lose every state, or is it better to be in the Republican primary and have the only state you win be Washington, D.C.? There's so much insidery beltway stuff that's wrapped up in that, and Haley's trying to run as an outsider. I mean, a win is a win at the end of the day, and they can't point to one, so they need it, but I'm not sure D.C. is their most ideal place.
Yeah, it's a complicated mix of people who is supporting her from that perspective. Allie, you're absolutely right. You're going to be on the panel on Sunday, so we're looking forward to that. Thanks so much,
excited,
Allie
Kristen.
Vitale. We are too. Great reporting. Ken, let me turn to you. You are in Florida, where there was a hearing about the classified documents case. Still no court date that's been set yet, right? What happened? What were your key takeaways from Trump actually being in court?
He was fairly impassive, Kristen, but I have to say I came away from today's day-long hearing more confident perhaps than I was before that there's a chance that this case could go to trial before the November election, in part because in response to the judge's demands, both sides have offered proposed schedules, and the special counsel's office thinks that this could go to trial in July, and then Mr. Trump's lawyers begrudgingly proposed a date for August. Now, they quickly said that they don't believe that that can stand, and they made a point of saying they don't think it's fair that he should go to trial before the election. They think that that's election interference, and it was interesting that Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, did not push back on that at all, in contrast to Judge Tanya Chutkan in D.C., who made clear that running for president does not excuse Mr. Trump from any of his obligations as a criminal defendant. Cannon didn't say any of that today, but she did give the impression that she wants to move this case along. She didn't rule on the scheduling, and she also, though, made a point of challenging the special counsel on some of their optimistic timelines. She thinks it's going to take longer than they think it's going to take. But again, there is a prospect that this will get to trial before November.
Well, that would certainly be hugely significant. Ken, Judge Cannon notably brought up what you and I spent a lot of time talking about, this 60-day unofficial rule, which effectively says that the Justice Department wouldn't engage in any activities against a candidate 60 days out before an election. What did Jack Smith say about that? What was the pushback and reaction?
That was the news of the day, actually, Kristen, that the Justice Department, through Jay Bratt, one of the prosecutors, speak. Jack Smith was sitting in the back. He didn't speak. But the Justice Department affirmatively stated to the judge that they have looked into this matter, and that rule, it's not really the 60-day rule, that's sort of the nickname, but it's a rule that prohibits the Justice Department from taking action that would affect an election. That rule doesn't apply to cases post-indictment. So none of the cases here at issue, both this Florida case and the D.C. case, are affected by that rule. And I think the theory behind that is that, look, the public already knows all the facts in this case. There's nothing secret here. There's nothing that's being sprung on the public a few days before an election. So they've had time to factor this in. So whether the trial is held before the election or after the election, it doesn't really have the potential to affect the vote. And so that's not going to be a factor.
Well, what an extraordinary day in court in Florida. Ken Dilanian, thank you for bringing it to us. Let's head to Atlanta now. Another court case. Marissa, walk us through what unfolded in that Atlanta courtroom today. This, of course, is the case aimed at disqualifying the district attorney, Fani Willis, and her team from this case because of her affair with the top prosecutor, which they argue did not start before she appointed him. What happened today?
Hey, Kristen, a lot of turns when it comes to this election interference case. And so this latest chapter here, of course, this motion that was filed by one of Trump's co-defendants to disqualify Fani Willis. So this latest chapter today, actually, this hearing today just wrapped within the last 15 minutes. I'll start by saying that the judge said no decision has been made right now at this moment. So I'll walk you through what we saw so far today. The judge started out by saying today was a day for arguments. They've been following this week. You'll know that both the state and the defense have been trying to submit new evidence between cell phone records, text messages, a Napa employee who would corroborate something that Willis and Wade had testified. The judge said today is only for arguments, and he would decide only later if he would allow in new evidence to be submitted. So we heard those arguments. We heard first from the defense, and really just a summary of what we've been hearing for the last several weeks, painting a picture of Wade and Willis living this lavish lifestyle and saying and describing Willis as really financially benefiting from hiring Wade to the tune, one lawyer said, to the tune of $9,200. But then we also heard from the state. I'll also mention that Wade and Willis were inside of court today. Of course, there's a big question on whether or not we would hear from Fani Willis, as we did a couple of weeks ago. We did not. The state saying the burden has not been met for disqualification, making the case that she did not profit from his work. They have previously testified that they were in a consensual relationship for about a year, and this was after Wade has been hired as special prosecutor. One of the arguments that they had made was that these credit card statements don't really actually paint a full picture because Willis was paying him back in cash. And so we heard all the way up until, as I mentioned, the last 15 minutes, the judge, a lot of question on whether or not we would hear from the judge on a decision on whether or not Willis and her entire team would be disqualified. And of course, he had said that that is not happening right now. He said this is a very complex, complex legal issues here, Kristen, and it's going to take time. He said, look for something from me within the next 2 weeks, Kristen.
Complex legal issues following weeks of dramatic testimony. Marissa, Parra, thank you so much for bringing us all of your great reporting from inside the courtroom. We really appreciate it. Let me turn now to Garrett. Haake, Garrett, talk about, you and I have spent a lot of time discussing this, the fact that Trump has a political calendar and a legal calendar, and the legal calendar is getting a lot more interesting, particularly after what you just heard from Ken, that based on what he heard today, he thinks it's not impossible that the documents case goes to trial.
Yeah, I've long believed that the most important elements of this campaign are not happening on the traditional campaign trail. They're happening in the courtrooms around this country where Donald Trump's legal fate will be decided. Today is a perfect example of why that's true. Up until now, I think the Donald Trump campaign has benefited from kind of this confusing sort of strategic nihilism about all this. None of these cases really matter. It's all election interference. It's all a bunch of Democrats trying to stop me. That has worked really well for him in a primary, and the strategy of delay, delay, delay has also had a political benefit of pushing all this off until later. But later's coming up sooner than the Trump campaign would like, and Ken's reporting raises the possibility that voters could be confronted with the facts of these cases, potentially both of these federal cases at some point in this fall, while ballots are sitting on their kitchen table. We don't have election day anymore in this country. We have election month. Yeah. If your ballot's on your table in October and you're watching every day Donald Trump sitting in a courtroom, that's going to affect the minds of people who are not the dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporters who are pushing him through this primary.
It's such an important point, and it kind of takes me to what Nikki Haley was saying, and her justification, quite frankly, which we've heard over and over again, for her staying in the race. She has not won yet, as Ali just noted, but she says, look, I'm getting 40% of the vote in a lot of these states. That's 40% of voters who are not voting for Trump. Does the Trump team see that as a vulnerability heading into a likely general election rematch with President Biden?
I think they do, but it's not entirely clear to me how they're going to address it. And I've been trying to get at this question from them in different ways, because on the one hand, you have the candidate saying, I don't want these people's support. I had asked him that question in gaggles. He says, I don't need those supporters. I think the professionals on his campaign would say, yeah, you're probably going to in a general election. And to the degree we've seen a strategy on that, it is that they believe, I think broadly, that these voters will come home. Just as Joe Biden says, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. I think the Trump campaign believes when the alternative is Joe Biden, some of these Nikki Haley supporters will come back. They probably need, if not all of them, a much bigger chunk than some. And so how they solve that question will be hugely important as we go into the fall.
I think it will be. And of course, you and I reported last week that he was being advised to set his sights towards the general election. How's that going? And what is he hoping for heading into Super Tuesday?
Yeah, look, I think the evidence that anybody's ever going to be able to fully change how Trump operates is still lacking, right? We've seen him out on social media, still going after Nikki Haley, still talking about these court cases. I think he realizes there is some resonance with the voters he needs right now still to continue talking about these things that we might look at as his grievance, but his supporters look at as part of the reason they have to rush out and defend him, right? So that effort to sort of push him in a different direction has been ongoing for many years, and I think will continue. As for Super Tuesday, they know they can't get to the number they need to become the presumptive nominee on Tuesday, but they do think they could theoretically knock Nikki Haley out of this race for once and for all. And so whether he can stay really disciplined between now and then could be very useful to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And if she doesn't win any states, if donors start to leave, I think that's
really the key thing, right?
Yeah.
It's always when the money runs out. That's when candidates have to make those really hard decisions.
Exactly. Well, you and I are bracing for a busy couple of days.
We are.
Garrett, hey, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. You can see much more of my exclusive one-on-one interview with Nikki Haley this Sunday on Meet the Press. Coming up, 2024's most hot-button issues. While visiting the border, former President Trump weighs in on reproductive rights, what he's saying now about IVF laws and abortion restrictions. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We want to turn now to some other major issues in the spotlight ahead of Super Tuesday and the presidential election this November. President Biden and Republican frontrunner Donald Trump both traveled to the southern border yesterday to spotlight competing views and point fingers at each other on the issue of migration. While there, former President Trump also weighed in on another hot-button issue for 2024, reproductive rights. Take a listen.
I got a call from Katie Britt, a very wonderful young senator in Alabama. And she said friends of mine were coming up and like almost attacking her. They were so upset about it. And I said, what's the issue? What is it? Explain. What is it exactly? And we're talking about the IVF. And I said, we want that. We want people to help. We're on the side of women. And same thing on the abortion issue. The abortion issue. Now, I'm for the exceptions like Ronald Reagan was for the exceptions. And I think it's very important to be
mother's life.
Correct. Life of the mother. I think it's a very important thing, the exceptions.
Now, it comes as an Alabama Supreme Court ruling that frozen embryos or children has catapulted the issue of reproductive rights back into the national conversation. Yesterday, Alabama state lawmakers passed 2 bills aimed at protecting IVF from the fallout. And Alabama Senator Katie Britt is set to deliver the Republican response to President Biden's State of the Union next week. You just heard former President Trump talking about her. But national legislation to protect IVF failed in the U.S. Senate after its Democratic sponsor tried to pass it with unanimous consent. Mississippi Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith blocked the bill, calling it, quote, vast overreach. Joining me now is our great panel, Republican strategist Garrett Ventry, Simone Sanders Townsend, co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC, and Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for Politico. Thanks to all of you for being here on this busy Friday. Daniela, let me start with you. Obviously, former President Trump appointed the 3 conservative Supreme Court justices who made it possible to overturn Roe v. Wade. He has not yet laid out clearly where he stands on how many weeks he would support. We're hearing 15 weeks. We're hearing 16 weeks. How is that factoring into how this is all playing out in 2024?
It's the biggest issue other than immigration. That's what we're seeing, Kristen, and that's why we're seeing so many of these lawmakers weigh in on this issue on both sides, because it's such a big issue. But really, if you think about the impact that Trump had on the Supreme Court, that could have been possibly his biggest legacy from when he was first in office. And we're still seeing the impact of that now. And if he's in office again, still something that he's been discussing. So really, what it's going to be continue to be the biggest issue that is coming up, especially this talk about in vitro fertilization.
Yeah, and we saw the huge role that it played in the midterms and special elections. Garrett, let me turn to you because we have reporting that when Roe was overturned, Mr. Trump talked to advisors about the fact that this is politically challenging for Republicans. And now we actually have some election results which show how challenging it is. Do you think he needs to come out and say definitively, here's where I stand. I support a ban at X, Y, or Z weeks, exceptions, as you just heard him talking about. I mean, how do you anticipate he's going to handle this issue moving forward?
Absolutely, and it's a great question. It's one that continues to linger for Republicans. If you look back at the 2022 midterm elections, the big issues were economy, whereas was inflation, was the border, but you had this undercurrent beneath that of abortion that maybe wasn't showing up as the major priority in the polls, but it certainly was after June, after Roe v. Wade was overturned and returned to the states. You're seeing this with the IVF ruling in Alabama. Obviously, they're rushing to get legislation there. I think Republican candidates in the past, what they have done is this. They've said Democrats are radical on abortion. They run away. They talk about the border and the economy. It's not cutting it. So you can talk about the economy, you can talk about immigration. They are central issues that voters do care about. But if you run away from abortion and don't address it and make your position clear, it's not only just making your position clear, though, but it's actually having something to offer. And I think you are seeing some candidates in the Senate try to do that. And I think that's something they're going to need to do going forward. President Trump's going to have to make his position clear and then get back to the other issues that matter to voters as well.
My question is, when will he do that? Simone, let me show our viewers some polling. It shows that 2/3 of Americans are opposed to considering frozen embryos people, including 67% of independents and nearly half of Republicans. What do you make of those numbers, and what do you make of how Democrats, politically speaking, are handling this moment? Obviously, the vice president very outspoken on this issue.
Very much so. I mean, she's on a tour, if you will, talking about reproductive freedoms. It's an extension of a tour that she, I think, did last year that was focused on college campuses. And this one is particularly about reproductive rights. I think that polling is important, and it speaks directly to the legislation piece that Alabama Republicans in the state House and state Senate are rushing to get through. But in that debate, in the legislation I believe now is on the governor's desk, they did not address whether an embryo was considered a person. They punted that down the road. That is the core issue. They could not come to a consensus on that. And because of that, that speaks directly to the Life at Conception Act. The bill in the House of Representatives that 125 Republicans, including the Speaker, has signed on to. Life at conception, one could argue, if you fertilize an egg and make it an embryo, is that in fact conception? So there are some very key details that people have to get on the record here on, and I think that Democrats just have to continue to be clear. I think you're absolutely right. This is no longer a debate about weeks, okay? This is a debate about if you think people should be able to make the decision about their own bodies, or do you think legislators, whether they're in your state capital or Washington, D.C., should be making those decisions for you?
I do think that's going to be the key question moving forward. Big picture, one of the issues looming over the primary and the general election, former President Trump's legal battles. We've been talking about them throughout the hour. Nikki Haley really had an extraordinary comment to me when I asked her if she thought Trump would uphold the Constitution in a second term. She took a long pause and said, I don't know. She has been defiant. She's staying in this race through Super Tuesday. Her arguments against Trump haven't worked so far, but it seems like she's almost starting to make an ideological argument here for staying in the race.
Well, I feel like she's been doing that from the very beginning. This isn't really, I mean, she's, throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks, but really nothing has changed from what she's been leading on or running on as someone very different from former President Donald Trump and continuing to really try to be a stark contrast from him. But it's undeniable that Trump's the presumptive nominee at this point. And regardless of this last-minute endorsement that Nikki Haley just received from a senator, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, before that election, or anything else that's happening right now to get Nikki Haley possibly to get more support before Super Tuesday, it's not going to happen. Trump really is the base of the Republican Party, and I see that every day, Kristen, when I'm going to Capitol Hill and covering Congress.
It's notable that Lisa Murkowski came out with this endorsement today, Garrett. What did you make of that? But more broadly speaking, what did you make of Nikki Haley's comments that she doesn't know that Trump's going to follow the Constitution in a second term? There's 40% of Republican voters who are not supporting Trump. They're supporting her. Could that make it tougher to win them over?
So I think if you take a step back, I mean, Lisa Murkowski's never been very friendly towards President Trump. She literally, voted to convict him in the Senate. I don't think it's that surprising. I think it's the last stand of the never Trump movement left within Congress. I think that if you look at this here, you're talking about President Trump has had dominant performances in Iowa over Ron DeSantis, who visited all 99 counties and won by 30 there. Beat Nikki Haley by double digits in New Hampshire. She outspent him 3-4-1 there, spent most of her time in the centerpiece of her campaign. She got her butt kicked in South Carolina, very embarrassingly, by 20 points. She just lost in Michigan by 40 points. And she can't name a state that she's going to win. I mean, we're talking about D.C. She might not even win D.C. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But we're talking about President Trump's going to have this locked down. And if you take a step back looking at the general here, it's not hurting him in a general election. You've had polls that come out 7 swing states where he's beating Joe Biden head-to-head in the swing states and on the key issue that mattered to the voters.
Simone, what about that? What about the polling in the swing states? How do you balance that with this 40% who continues to choose Nikki? 40, yes, you're right, in Michigan, lower than that, continues to choose Nikki Haley.
I think it's really early for swing state polling to be determinative, but I think what is determinative is these primaries. And the fact that the president of the United States, Joe Biden, is handedly winning his primaries, and the fact that the former president of the United States that would like to be the Republican nominee is losing 40%, maybe some 35 in some places, would be alarming to me if I was advising that campaign. So let me just say this about Nikki Haley. When you asked the question, Kristen, I was like, yes. Nikki Haley is she's going to give it to us. And Nikki Haley said, I don't know. Nikki Haley was the UN ambassador in the Trump administration. She has sat in the room with Donald Trump. She knows, she has stories and she knows things that we would probably never hear her say. She heard Donald Trump himself say that we should just rip up the Constitution. You know. And if he hasn't said it, look at what he has done. I think that there are so many people out there waiting with bated breath for Nikki Haley to just say the thing, to just tell us what she believes, tell us what she really thinks about Donald Trump. And to Daniela's point, she's throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. I think that Nikki Haley knows the answer to that question. I think that she actually has an answer. She just didn't give it to you.
Garrett, wasn't the pause in and of itself, I thought, was a significant moment coming on the heels of her telling me last night she wants all of the trials to go to court.
I mean, she's just an outlier in the Republican Party right now. You're talking about, again, these are, you know, she could make that.
She did serve with him, though, to Simone's point, and a number of his former officials have also broken with him.
That's true, but a lot of these people have come back and endorsed him, these folks that have you know, ran against him, those type of things that happen. Even Ron DeSantis, it was a brutal campaign. I think, again, here, you're looking at, you know, this is a contested primary. You're talking about Joe Biden's got Dean Phillips, and it'd be different if Gavin Newsom, others were challenged. You might don't think Joe Biden would be getting 60% of the vote. He also, in Michigan, you know, struggled against, you know, uncommitted because of his comments.
About 100,000 people voted uncommitted. He still got 90% of the vote.
It's still problematic when you're essentially running against non-committed and getting there. And if you look again going forward, he's losing to Donald Trump in every issue that matters: immigration, the economy, inflation, border, national security. And so that's going to be a problem going into 2024 in a head-to-head matchup.
And there's no doubt Democrats are paying attention, but as you say, it is still somewhat early. Thanks to all of you. Great Friday conversation. Garrett, Simone, and Daniela, appreciate it. Coming up next, as the hunger crisis deepens in Gaza, President Biden announces the U.S. will join other countries and begin airdropping food aid to Palestinians desperate for it. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Questions continue to swirl around yesterday's deadly incident near an aid convoy in northern Gaza, with international leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and the UN Secretary General, both calling for an independent investigation into those events. This latest incident also underscores the dire need for even more humanitarian assistance in Gaza. President Biden announced today that the U.S. will join a list of other countries airdropping aid into Gaza, adding that the current levels of aid into Gaza is not nearly enough.
The truth is, aid flowing to Gaza is nowhere nearly enough. Now, it's nowhere nearly enough. Innocent lives are on the line, and children's lives are on the line. And we won't stand by and let until we get more aid in there.
Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Ali Rafa. Ali, thank you so much for joining me. So yesterday, President Biden actually walked back his expectation that a ceasefire could be reached by Monday, given what happened around the aid convoy and people getting shot while trying to get aid. But what are you hearing from officials from behind the scenes?
Yeah, Kristen, that's right. We heard from the president yesterday say that he knows that this Gaza attack over this delivery of humanitarian aid would impact those ongoing talks about hostage negotiations, about the letting in of more humanitarian aid in Gaza. And in the short term, just since that attack, we know that these conversations are ongoing, but they have now gone into a more remote and virtual mode rather than the in-person discussions that we know were happening for months now. And as far as the long term, that's something that was asked to National Security Council spokesman John Kirby in today's White House press briefing, how more largely, more broadly, those talks could be impacted by that attack in Gaza. Kirby telling reporters that it is still too soon to say, but saying that there is progress in the right direction. But of course, we know this is still a very concerning issue for this White House, both publicly and privately. As we know, the president continues to be criticized for standing so strongly in support behind Israel, Kristen.
And Allie, tell me about the comments in the Oval Office today. What did we hear from the president?
Yeah, the president in his bilateral meeting with the Italian prime minister announcing that the U.S. in the coming days will partner with Jordan and other countries to deliver humanitarian aid by air. And he says that this is being done to boost humanitarian aid in Gaza as the UN warns of a possible famine if conditions don't improve there. The White House also saying that they're in the early stages of also considering a maritime option to be able to get more aid into Gaza. But of course, they say that this just supplements but does not replace the deliveries of humanitarian aid through trucks via those border crossings that the White House says that they are working closely with Israel to try to boost in the coming days, Kristen.
Okay, Allie, thank you. And getting some scrutiny as well for confusing Ukraine and Gaza and then correcting himself. Allie Rafa, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We will be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. Don't miss my interviews with Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley and Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. And mark your calendars for the NBC News Super Tuesday special coverage. That's next Tuesday, March 5th, right here on NBC News Now. Coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.